TV umpire to director, we have a player review. Can we rock and roll, please?
Welcome to episode 9 of Bits and Pieces. This is your friendly podcast coming to you every week. And once again, we have an eclectic collection of people. First up, we're never sure where he is. He was in Switzerland and gave this podcast kind of a neutral feel and the feeling that we were close to where the money is. Unfortunately, the money hasn't seen us, but we keep seeing him every once in a while. He was once in China for a few weeks, and he was last seen on a Trichy highway chomping on idlis and so on. Welcome to Sripat, wherever you are.
Thanks, Hank. I just wish I could have idli sellers in the background, but that's cows. Nice to be here again.
Welcome. Tony is the next person I'm going to introduce. He's a resident anti-groupthink guy. He hates New Zealand cricket team, and everyone in the group tends to love them. He is a Shastri lover, and not many people actually love Shastri. And he loves all things Malayali cricketers, and people aren't sure why. So our anti-groupthink guy, Tony.
Yeah, I approach podcasts and WhatsApp groups similar to how I approach board games. So if you play Catan with me, stay off the sheep. I'm hoarding all of that.
Sheep in New Zealand, a good connection there already. The next guest on this is Nitin. He and Tony appear to have one thing in common. And both of them do so many things in a day. He must manufacture time somehow. But one thing he and Tony do not have in common is the need to tolerate Bangalore traffic. Nitin, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for welcoming me, Mohan. Absolutely enjoying Bangalore traffic, especially in the last 2 years where I've not had to leave home too often. Yeah.
Are you stuck somewhere in the Mother Diary circle?
Dairy circle. But Dairy circle is the mother of all traffic jams. That is true. So.
And finally, we have Karthik, or cartographer with a K, and without any vowel movements. This is cartographer Karthik. Welcome. You're in the US.
Hey, Hank. Hi, guys.
And I'm Mohan with dad jokes and a pop filter. Hater of everything IPL because someone has to. We'll start this podcast by saying that it's been a very mixed week. We've had KL Rahul, provider of much mirth and fun in this podcast especially. He did his hammy while not doing too much, and he was ruled out of everything for a long while, and he's not able to provide much material for this podcast. In the sartorial elegance segment of this podcast, we have had Anushka Sharma, who was at Virat Kohli's 100th test match, wearing a top that Jerry Seinfeld had used and discarded. Our auctioneer Sar was seen in the Davis Cup doing something. Russell Arnold only buddied Ashwin, and that was mildly awkward for everyone concerned. It was also a week when Srisan, Tony's long-lost friend, made his comeback after some 11 years or so. He took a wicket and promptly fell Ayyappa on the pitch and kissed it. We've had also much mirth from McAdams, although McAdams is not cricket related, but people have tried to relate it to cricket. Pakistan played a test match, is still playing a test match at home. And the captain said it's an away test for a team, but it's also an away test for them because they're completely unfamiliar with the conditions there. But the week has been dominated by first Rod Marsh and then Shane Warne. And I guess this podcast, which is normally full of banter and fun and jokes, might take a different hue this week. We'll just go around and take some initial views and then come back to digesting it more fully. Nitin.
We're recording this on Sunday morning, so I think all of us have had about 1.5 days to process, the departure of Shane Warne. I think it's, at least in my case, it's taken a long time to come to terms with, Warne's sudden and unexpected demise. There was this picture that went viral, right? The one where, God, or whatever, the keeper of the cathedral is sort of being bamboozled by Shane Warne as well.
Saint
I
Peter.
thought...
It was a Satish Acharya cartoon.
Yeah, and we should link that from the show notes for people who have not seen it. My connection to Shane Warne, and I think all of us would probably agree to this, is that there's probably nobody who watched cricket in these last, 30 years who did not love Shane Warne, right? And I don't think there are too many cricketers who could say that about. Around the world, the reaction to Shane Warne's passing has been one of uniform despair and sadness and shock. And it's just a testimony to the man's impact, what he's had on the game.
Initial comments, Tony?
Yeah, a couple of things before I get to one. One is that Srishant actually took that wicket a couple of weeks ago, I think Feb 16th or something. Since then, Kerala have played 2 matches and he's not been part of the team. Even Aiden Appleton has been missing. So it's like Ranji news travels really, really slow. So just to put that out there. But the other thing about that cartoon was that we couldn't, sort of name Saint Peter, which is expected. But there was a lot of outrage about that cartoon because people thought that the Saint Peter character was Modi ji, and Satish Acharya got trolled because how can you mix politics in something like Shane Warne, right? So while there was the virulence in that comment, it was apparent that Shane Warne is much loved and respected by everyone, right? And he's one of the originals. So yeah, I think we'll get into it. But it was absolutely shocking to hear that at 52 he passed away.
Yeah, Karthik?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to something that Nitin and I were discussing maybe yesterday, which is not just the shock of losing somebody of the stature of Warne, someone that a lot of us grew up basically, following, and a lot of us grew up looking at him as certainly, enemy top 3, if not enemy number 1. And I know, for example, that the tour of India was a very formative time for a lot of us when the Aussies came to India and there were a lot of things going on. But it wasn't just the sort of stature of the player himself and, in fact, Warne the entertainer, but also the shock of he died at 52. And this is not something that you expect, certainly not, for people that you have grown up sort of seeing and idolizing and so on, but not for someone who is an athlete, right? I mean, Warne famously has had issues, with weight and other things and so on, but these guys are still athletes, and you don't expect, in some sense, to be up against the mortality of these people until they're well into their 70s, 80s. I think Nitin and I were talking about how in 2001, during the Aussie tour, just before that, I think Bombay Test, Don Bradman passed away. And the Don was 90 plus at that time, and it still sent shockwaves through the entire cricketing sort of fraternity, and the whole fraternity came together. But these unexpected, sudden losses, it's really hard to come to terms with it. And one last thing I'll also say is, somebody was also making the point that this is probably what it felt like when Malcolm Marshall died. And the only thing we can be thankful for, maybe thankful is not the right word, but maybe the silver lining is at least now we have the power of social media, we have the internet, so we can at least have collective sort of grieving sessions in some sense. And we can take solace not just in community grief, but also in replaying videos on YouTube and, clips and reading things and so forth. And so for that, I'm very thankful.
And Srinath?
The first thing was the number of casual cricket fans who reached out when they found out Warne had passed away. People know that you're a cricket fan, you post things on social media. A lot of people who I know who have absolutely no interest in following cricket on a daily basis followed Warne. They knew who Warne was. And that's down to a couple of things. There's the sheer charisma factor of the guy, the personality, and what he meant to the game. You couldn't take your eyes off him when he was bowling. The second thing is also the simplicity of his craft, in the sense that you just needed a couple of paces in your living room to imitate his bowling, right? Which is not very common. Cricket generally tends to complicate itself, and it's also got a selling problem. You saw the kind of people, the sheer swathe of people from around the world. There's the likes of Ed Sheeran and Chris Martin, who've been referred to multiple times. But which cricketer hangs out with Michael Jordan in the 90s, man, in the Nike office in the US? Just like so unlike the rest of the game. And I think that's been a source of delight for me in the last couple of days in the middle of all the grief. It's just been so touching in so many ways that the whole world has reached out in different ways.
I'll start with Ed Sheeran and Chris Martin. They are both featured in the Shane Warne documentary quite extensively. And it's not surprising that people from all walks of life reach out and are connected with him, or were connected with him. It's quite amazing, and in a strange and bizarre coincidence, I was at a friend's place till about midnight on Friday evening, Australia time, and we were talking. The last thing we talked about over there was the documentary. And there was one of my friends who just didn't believe that there was a need for a documentary on Shane Warne, and the rest of us trying to convince him of the stature of the person and what he brought to the game, which was just more than what his contributions were: 708 wickets and tests, and so many other contributions in one-day matches, in tests, in T20s, and so on. The Rajasthan Royals, the various things that he's done. But everything around his life that's much more than just cricket. And I came back home, and for some strange reason I woke up at 1 and saw this on my phone, and I said, "No, this is fake news." And then it hit me, and I just couldn't process it, couldn't sleep at all for many hours after that. And that's the power of that, the personality that Shane Warne was. It's just really difficult to comprehend, even for me, a good day and a half after that.
I had actually watched that documentary last night.
Oh, you did? Okay.
After Warne passed. And just for everyone else listening in, the Chris Martin we are referring to is not cricket's own phantom Chris Martin, but the slightly more famous one. And in that same breath, right, it's not just Chris Martin and Ed Sheeran. I think Mick Jagger also has an association with cricket, and I'm sure that he also probably is reacted to Shane Warne's death. Who else in the world of cricket would have taken Liz Hurley with him to Las Vegas to play for his poker dalliances? And
I mean, many
Andrew
of us
Miller
would have liked to, but
Yeah.
yes.
Who could have?
This man actually made it happen. There's a wonderful piece by Andrew Miller on Cricinfo, which came out, I think, yesterday, where he talks about spending time with Shane Warne in Las Vegas when he was trying to crack the poker scene. And Warne did pretty well, by the way. He finished just outside the money. The World Series of Poker is an all or bust kind of event, right? The best poker players in the world show up over there, and I think you start with a really huge field, and ultimately I think only a handful of people take home all the money, and Warne just missed out on making the money cut, and he went there a few times, right? So he kept honing his craft.
and there was one time when he ran really deep and basically turned up late for Ash's commentary or something.
That was his commentary
Yes,
debut, in 2009.
and apparently he's revealed this to Andrew Miller, when after having lost at the poker table, that I always used to overplay my jacks, and that just describes Shane Warne so perfectly, right? He was someone on a cricket field who could make something happen out of nothing, right? And forget overplaying a jack, he would overplay a 3. The zooter, right? The mystery delivery that Shane Warne invented, at best is a 3 of hearts. It's a 2 and a 7, right? On your in your poker hand, and he used that to seed doubt in the minds of batsmen.
Yep.
I've been spending the last couple of days just looking at.
Sorry,
Shane Warne,
I'm just going to say that Zooter needs to be the generic name for startups that overpromise and raise a lot of investment money. I think we should put this up.
Trademark registered in HSR layout, 100%.
ZOOTR.
But actually, to add to that point that Nitin, you were just talking about, it wasn't just even overpromising and sort of preying on people's minds through new deliveries and so on, right? So I went back and I think as a lot of us probably were doing, I was looking at a lot of the famous balls that Warne has bowled through the years, right? And one very one short clip on YouTube is about the famous Basit Ali ball, the last ball of the day.
That was a classic.
Bowled through the legs, and so in this one, I think this is an outtake from a documentary or something, where Warne is basically describing the setup to that ball, right? Like he's talking about how Basit Ali was trying to play all these mind games by, sort of coming off his mark when Warne was just ready to run in and bowl, and a whole bunch of this stuff happened. And so before the last ball of the day, apparently Warne goes up to Healy, who's behind the stumps, and he takes Healy aside, and apparently they start chatting about, Warne is like, okay, so what do you want to get for dinner? Do you want to get pasta, Mexican, whatever, right? And so this goes on for about, a few minutes, and then they can see Basit Ali sort of getting agitated because he just wants to play out the last ball of the day and go home, right? And then, of course, the rest is on video that all of us have seen. He gets bowled through the legs, and, Warne he almost... It looks like he almost gets more happiness out of the fact that he outfoxed Basit Ali, right? That he outthought him and seeded that doubt in his mind when there was really nothing. It was not like he and Healy were making this great plan to get him out and so on, right?
You wouldn't believe it. He's done him between his legs. Well, whatever it is they talked about, you can bet your life in future it'll be, why don't you give him the one that'll bowl in between his legs?
I think this is line of his, I think it's from No Spin, which I'm yet to fully listen to, where he says it's cool if you can create uncertainty, but it's awesome if you can create chaos, right? And that's what the man was all about. Like, I think Kevin Peterson also comments on this, right? Even if you hit him for a 6, Warne will be like, ooh, that was so close. And basically the batters are like, what the hell happened? I just middled that, right? But Shane Warne really, really loved that, and he was the master at it.
It's also not just the batters, right? Like, it's the whole experience. He would go to umpires and tell them how he was going to get the batsman out, and then he'll do something else to seed doubt in their heads and make them give that LBW decision. It's very easy to forget that he took all his wickets before DRS. Like, we don't know where you'd have ended up, for example. The other thing is also, to Kart's point, this is like the whole viral clip about Brendan McCullum in the BBL. They're facing Brisbane Heat. Warne's, I think, playing for the Melbourne Stars, and he's got his microphone on and he's telling the commentators, the guys in the box, what he's going to do next ball. And he's telling them that he's going to bowl him around the legs because McCullum's trying to sweep him. And that's exactly what happens. McCullum probably cannot hear what Warne is saying from the other end, but it's absolutely incredible that he does it the next ball. And he made this a habit. I mean, there's viral clips where you'd call this 30 or 40 times and get it right 4 or 5 times, because that's the highlights reel, and Warne's myth is, built that much more because of that. But the guy was just a whole experience. He was not just a bowler running in just like all the other guys.
When he's bowling, that's theatre for him. It's not just sport, but it's basically theatre. So he creates the moment. He lives that moment and he builds it up so that he is the spotlight is on him, and he loved it. And that's the thing about that particular player that endeared himself to fans. And I think there's a curious and a weird sort of juxtaposition between Marsh's passing and Warne's. Marsh was the larrikin. Marsh was from that generation of Aussie larrikins who lived. They drank the night before the game. They played like larrikins do, very, very, but they played really, really seriously on the field and outside. They just lived life really, really big. And Warne was the kind of strange connection between that generation and a generation that didn't quite understand that kind of a behavior. And in some sense, he's the captain that Australia never had. He would have made, in my view, a fantastic captain.
11 ODIs and 10-1 out of that is the record, apparently. It's pretty great. It's pretty good.
Yeah, not Robro level, but still.
But incredible thinking skills, and it's simply because he loved that pressure and he thrived on that pressure, and he made that pressure his own, and he said, this is my theatre and I'm going to live it. And all eyes were on him, and it was just fantastic to see him build that and then live it. Very few cricketers do that.
In some sense, in the 90s, I'm trying to think, right? I was actually going back and trying to think about this. Like, Warne was the first cricketer that I can remember, at least from that generation of cricketers that we grew up, watching, who not only sort of changed the game in terms of, being larger than life and taking the game, by the horns and sort of saying, look what I'm going to do. he did it with a declaration of intent, right? Which is not to be confused with what Rohit did yesterday, which was an intent of declaration. But no, he basically not only went there, but he declared before he was going there that, look, this is what I'm going to do, right? Like, as against someone like Sachin, who you could claim, Sachin was just as, or maybe even more sort of, of an influence, and but Sachin never really declared those things, right? He let his bat do the talking, to be trite and to use a cliche, right? Whereas Warne, it was always about, look what I'm about to do. Even before I do this thing, I want the eyes of the world on me, and I know that I can back this up, right? And in some sense, going back to the point you were making, he was the successor of the Aussie teams of the 70s, and all of the sort of great showmen in some sense, right? Except here he wasn't doing it with raw pace like a Lilly or a Tomo, or and it wasn't even like, it was aggression, but it was aggression couched in showmanship. It was like, I am going to get you, and I'm going to make you look foolish, and I'm going to have the eyes of the world on me while I do this, right? So yeah.
So one of the very interesting things I learned about Warne yesterday, a couple of things actually. He wasn't always into cricket. In fact, his first love was AFL. And I had no idea, right? He, at least later, never looked like someone who could succeed at the AFL, but he wasn't able to make the cut, and it really destroyed him. Not being able to get an in into the sport that he really wanted to shine in, apparently massively broke him, and which is why, and this makes sense later in 1999 when Steve Waugh dropped him from the Test team. It's something that Warne spoke about, and I think it soured relationships between the two of them forever, right, indelibly, which all makes sense. That was one thing, right? The fact that he even was interested in AFL and later turned to cricket. I think Rick Finlay made this point on Twitter that Shane Warne could have chosen to do anything and he would have been good at it, right? It's great for cricket, and we should all be thankful that he actually ended up choosing cricket. The other interesting thing about Warne and his formative years was that the reason he became so good as a leg spinner, apparently, according to him, is that when he was a small boy, a friend of his jumped on him from behind, and both his legs broke when he was really young, right? He had fractures, and his dad actually made a trolley for Shane Warne to get around because he couldn't walk. His legs were in plaster casts. So he used to use his hands and sort of navigate when he was lying down on a trolley. And according to Warne himself, using his hands so much with his wrists and his fingers to navigate and do all that sort of stuff apparently made his wrists and his hands so strong, supple, and his shoulders, which totally makes sense. I mean, I think Gideon Haigh has written about this as well in his book about Warne, that leg spin is amongst the most unnatural actions for the shoulder, especially, right? If your arm is coming straight down, that's okay. That's what the shoulder is built to do. But when you're doing your inward flex and turning your wrist the other way and releasing it hundreds of times a day, you're putting inordinate stress on your shoulders. This guy was just, through this quirk of fate when he was young, was blessed with such good shoulders and wrists and fingers and whatnot, and all of that came to play, right, in 1,000+ international wickets.
As the great cricketer said yesterday, it was very, very pithy one-liner about the leg spin brotherhood, and that's basically propel the ball forward and rotate it laterally at once. It's not natural to do, and you need your entire ounce of strength in your shoulders and wrists and everything else to get it done.
Was this Lakshman Shivaramakrishna?
Slightly better than a great cricketer. Yeah.
So the other thing, right? Obviously, Nitin mentioned AFL and how he was let go from, I think, St Kilda at the age of 18. Yeah. After that, he actually took a year off from cricket and AFL to play tennis, and he was actually got up to the number 3 tennis player in Victoria and was playing the first level tennis and stuff like that. So pretty cool. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys is, do you know why he wears the number 23 on his jersey?
Jordan, right?
Jordan, right? No?
It wouldn't, I mean, I wouldn't ask it if it were that easy, right?
Okay.
So basically,
his best friend in St Kilda wore the number 23 jersey, or his idol.
Yeah. It's from AFL. His AFL idol Dermot Brereton apparently wore number 23, and Warne's pretty obsessed with the number 23, right? Apparently, like everywhere, his swimming pool also has 23 written on it and stuff like that. So he was majorly into AFL.
When Warne was making his debut, Dermot Brereton was the player in the AFL. blonde, like Warne, blonde, flamboyant, and everything about him was big. And so Warne was idolized Dermot Brereton, yeah. Although he's not from St Kilda.
The documentary actually mentioned Trevor Barker, who also was in the AFL.
But Trevor Barker was if I remember
Was at
right,
St Kilda.
St Kilda. But Dermot Brereton wasn't, and Warne and Brereton had a remarkable friendship in the later years as well. But yeah, he absolutely idolized him, and that's why he took on the 23 jersey.
On that note, welcome to episode 1 of the Bits and Pieces AFL podcast.
So here's something I wanted to say, right? And thanks to Hank for introducing me as a Shastri fan, because this is not meant as disrespect in any manner. Is that Warne is actually pretty analogous to Ravi Shastri, right? In the sense that he has his own playbook. And possibly we've missed out on the peak of 2 more careers for Warne in commentary and probably in mentoring or something that he was going to do later on. So
Warne actually packed everything into his life. He did the mentorship gig. Rajasthan Royals, right, with Swapnil Asnokar and Mohammad Kaif. And he did commentary. He became a caricature in the commentary box as well. He's done everything Ravi Shastri, right, in a shorter period of time. And he played poker and whatnot.
The interesting thing is that he had very little time for coaches. And he took on the coach role at Rajasthan Royals, albeit briefly. And also the London Strikers or something like that?
London Spirit, yeah.
London Spirit in the 100.
And there's this famous quote, right, Hank? The coach is what you use to transport players from hotel to the ground. I think that's one.
Exactly right. That was one. But he took on these roles. I don't know if he was completely into it. But when he got there, he embraced it and said, look, this is quite amazing. The number of people who loved him and greeted him and fell in love with what he was going to do for the Rajasthan Royals. He absolutely loved it and said, wow, this is pretty serious stuff. I better do things seriously. The first game, apparently they lose, and he comes back to the dressing room and everyone's crying there, and he says, guys, we lost a game. It's okay. Don't pick yourself up. There are 15 more games to go. We'll turn this around. If we don't, it's okay. Let's have fun. I'm not sure he actually coached from a cricketing perspective. No one really knows this more than other than the players who were under his influence. But I think it was more thinking about the game and preparing for the game and doing the things right in the game itself. Situational awareness, which he was very, very big on.
There's a really nice interview with Harsha Bogle. I think it was the 2010-11 IPL season, where Warne is talking about how he uses common sense. Harsha comments, you didn't rate John Buchanan much, and Warne stops him there and says, not at all, and I use common sense more than anything else. He talks about how he didn't have fitness guys traveling every training session, guys just doing what they loved, and Harsha made a very interesting point about how some of the younger players came to him and spoke about how they'd never been called a match winner in their entire careers. Like, these are guys playing Ranji Trophy, lower grade cricket, city level cricket, Buchi Babu and so on. These are guys who've come to the media and spoken about how it's the first time anyone's ever called them a match winner, and Warne stops him again and asks him, are you talking about Jadeja? Are you talking about Yusuf Pathan? And Harsha says these are even smaller players. We're talking about Abhishek Raut and Siddharth Trivedi. These are guys from the 2010s IPL, if you remember. But that's the impact of the guy. That's the impact he had on a dressing room like the IPL, where he was not even speaking the language. He was not speaking Hindi at all. And this is the level of impact he's had on those kind of players.
So my, sort of the conclusion to that was, to my mind, the biggest loss other than Shane Warne that happened too early was Douglas Adams. We all know him for Hitchhikers and Doug Gently and all of that, but that man was a visionary when it came to tech, right? And that's like, if you read any of Douglas Adams' predictions about technology, you would see that we could have used him in the 2000s for the next 20 years, right? He also passed away when he was 49. I think the world of digital advertising itself would have looked drastically different if someone like Douglas Adams existed. To me, that's the kind of loss that Shane Warne is, because he had so much more to offer, right? And we all like to talk about his gamesmanship and stuff like that. But I think yesterday I mentioned this on the spaces that we opened up, is that people underrate the actual kind of preparation and strategy that he brings to the game, right? So if you have to succeed in poker at any level, let alone play the World Series of Poker, you need to do the math and the numbers and all of that much more than, the bluster and the flair that you bring to it. So he was a very, very astute observer of the game. Obviously, he brought it on with a little bit of performance art, but I think very, very underappreciated for his reading of the game. Not necessarily in the com box, but when he really wanted to bring it.
But there's actually a connection there, Tony. I was listening. I've been consuming a lot of material on Warne in the last sort of 18, like all of us, I guess. There's an interesting interview with Nasser Hussain. We think that he just rocks up and does his stuff.
Yeah.
And Nasser actually says, no, that's not who he was. Even in the commentary box, he would ring the producer 3 or 4 times to say, sort of, why do you want me to wear blue tomorrow? What sort of shade of blue do you want me to wear? Is it okay if it's shiny and stuff like that? So the guy actually was very meticulous in his preparation. When he was on, he was completely on, and when he was off, he would just have a drink and then snooze in the dining room for about half hour before his next shift was on, and then prepare for that. But that's the thing, right? He was very, very well prepared in everything that he did. And some part of me says, why did we miss out on so much that he could have offered commentator or a coach?
Just one thing on Warne in the com box, right? Like, he gets a lot of stick, justifiably. My general theory about it is, in the Channel 9 Fox Cricket com box, generally within Australia, there's that whole reverential element to Warne, and he is always with his mates. And so it's like friends having a beer, and they can say whatever they want, even though they're on air to a global TV audience.
Yeah, it's like it's bits and pieces or something.
It was bits and pieces, yeah. I mean, just like a bunch of mates talking cricket. I think on Sky, it was kind of very different. He was in a foreign country. There were guys to bring out the best in him. It was almost like prodding him to give out the best possible insights. And with Nasser holding an Atherton and David Lloyd and the lot, there were different shades of Warne that came through. David Lloyd absolutely loves Warne. He's probably one of the funnier guys on the Sky Combox, and when they were together, it was pretty good to listen to during the English summer. It's just my theory, but I think Warne as a commentator could have offered so much more with the right sort of panel around him, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think yesterday there was this video of Isa Guha basically calling him Magic, right? And that was really, really nice to see about how he made people around him comfortable, how generous he was. And probably there's like shades to his commentary elements that we haven't seen, right? So, yeah.
Nasser talks about this as well. When a match ends, typically everyone goes home. But everyone wants Shane Warne's autograph or photograph or a selfie with him or some advice for their son or something like that, or daughter. And Warne would actually spend time with each and every one of them. But there's a story that I can narrate without going into too much of the details. A young lad in Melbourne approached Warne and asked him for advice. In one of the school camps that he was part of. A year later, Warne returned to the camp and saw this guy and said, "Hey, how's the advice that I gave you? Is it actually playing out?" A year later, and this guy was completely stumped. He said, "Why?" Stumped metaphorically as well. But how would someone like Shane Warne remember me, first of all, and 2, remember the advice that he gave me, and 3, have the generosity to follow up on that and say, how's it going? And that's just quite phenomenal. I was stunned when I heard this.
Absolutely. I think that's very, very rare, right, of somebody who's at his stature. Yesterday, Bazid Khan was narrating a story during Pakistan-Australia comms about how Warne was once in Dubai, and I think the PSL was going on in the Gulf, if I'm not wrong. Warne actually rang up the PSL franchise and the commentary team if he could travel or drive from Dubai to Sharjah to meet Yasir Shah, who was in the middle of a bad patch. This is help offered without being solicited. And Warne is not even working there. He's not even there as a commentator. He's not there to help Yasir Shah. But this was the love and generosity he had. Like, whoever listened actually got everything they wanted from Warne. Even though they're probably nowhere close to his genius, you would always have time to speak to them for 30, 40 minutes whenever. I think Kuldeep Yadav benefited from it as well in England when India were there.
We should definitely talk about the dismissals, right? For me, at least, one thing that struck me, right? We all remember Sachin Tendulkar getting bowled by Alan Donald in that test match in Durban. The reason we remember that one so vividly is because Tendulkar has actually played the perfect shot. Right, he could not have played a better shot to that ball and he lost his stumps. The brilliance of most of Shane Warne's highlights reels is that they are made up of multiple such dismissals, right? Where the batsman actually feels he has played the perfect shot and he's out, right? The celebration has begun. And it's only after that the batsman even realizes that, oh shit, I need to turn back and see what happened. Oh, the stumps are gone.
Oh,
and
the Mike getting reaction.
As soon as he let it go, you can hear it fizzing. He just swung it enough. It dipped in towards leg stump. And his bat's not coming down fast enough. It pitched and then it viciously turned from outside leg. Turned ridiculously. I've never seen a ball turn like that, ever. It's turned square. And took the off bail. The top of the off stump. It was just the perfect ball.
But there are other examples, right? There's this wicket of Pat Simcox, for instance. The ball is pitched like 3 feet outside leg stump. And Simcox has played a very nice forward defensive about 1 foot away from where the ball is. The ball has gone behind him and hit the stumps. There is MSK Prasad.
Legendary.
Right? He doesn't know which way he should turn to look at the stumps. And the stumps are gone. There is Kevin Peterson trying to play a sweep shot, very similar to what McCullum did, right? When it was called, I think this was the Adelaide Test, the famous Adelaide Test match in 2005, where he's trying to play a sweep and he played a pretty good sweep. It's just that the ball has gone 1 foot further down where it is pitched and it has turned behind him and it's hit the stumps and he staggers off the pitch after that. We should talk about all our favorite Shane Warne dismissals, right? Basit Khan, of course, is definitely up there. Basit Ali, is up there. He was like, no idea where to put his leg, right? He's standing like a crooked leaning tower of Pisa there, trying to move his left leg and block the ball. But we should talk about our favorite Warne dismissals.
I think Basit Ali should be removed because that'll be in the top 3 of everyone. Because
as with Mike Gatting. Yeah,
as with Mike Gatting.
So maybe it's also because of the quality of the batsman that got dismissed, right? There is this one where he clean bowls Jacques Kallis from round the stumps. It's a straight ball. It's a full ball. It pitches close to the feet, and Kallis gets forward to it, and he has a fairly solid. It's the Kallis defense. It's not any defense. It's the perfect Kallis defense. The ball has just gone through. Right? Nobody can explain what happened there. It's just that Shane Warne knows exactly where the gap is going to be. Right? And the ability to put the ball right there. So Kallis is up there for me.
The gap he maintained.
I would cheat. That gap he maintained. But I would cheat and go for one more. There's a flipper that he bowled to Alex Stewart. The speed at which Warne's deliveries move after they pitch is something else. And this particular ball, this flipper that goes through Alex Stewart, right, it's something else. Those definitely are the ones that stand out for me.
Tony?
Oh yeah, I think mine's going to be the later one with him just describing how he's going to get Brendan McCullum out and actually going about to do it. He's like, he's going to sweep, so I'm going to slide one quick in there and lo and behold, it happens, right? That's just superb. Like there's this magic show called Fool Us where Penn and Teller basically explain how magic tricks work. This was one such moment in sports that will stick with me for the longest time, right? But I think there was an interview with Shane Warne where he said his favorite reaction was a Brian McMillan dismissal where Brian McMillan looks absolutely shocked. I couldn't find it, but maybe that will be one that we put up in our show notes.
Robelinda, please help. Yeah, mine's actually from a one-day final. I think it was Carlton United series, and Brian Lara's at the crease. Thinks the fall of the first wicket. McGrath's been unsuccessful. Warne comes and picks up the first wicket. Part of Warne's legend is the whole mind games part of it and how he unsettled batsmen. So Lara walks in, Warne bowls a bouncer first up. Gilchrist picks it up behind the leg stump. What happens next is extremely predictable if it were any other batsman, but he's done it to Lara. Lara gets worked up, he gets angry, dances down the track and hits one straight to mid-off. Not straight to mid-off, it's a really good catch, I think. Diving catch in mid-off. But this is what Warne does to you in a one-day final. Stakes are pretty high. Batsman's a legend. It's probably the best that's ever played you, along with Sachin. And he just comes out and bowls a bouncer and then gets him. Just pure theatre, right? Like there's a whole crowd. And you can't keep your eyes off this. You can't say this was playing in the background. This is right in front of you and you missed it if you did.
Karthik?
I think one of the ones that I do want to talk about is so this one is sort of like a proto-Strauss dismissal, right? So I guess the three that we should rule out and not allow anybody to go for, one is Basit Ali, one is Gatting, and one is Andrew Strauss, right? Just looking completely like what the hell happened, right? But Strauss, at least the thing was, it went behind him, right? So he didn't expect the ball to deviate as much, right? It goes behind him. There is a Chandrapal dismissal, and I think you guys know which one I'm talking about.
Yes.
So, Warne is around the wicket, right? Bowling to Chandrapal. He pitches the ball way outside off stump, right in the rough, right? And at that point, the moment it pitches, there's still reaction time for the batsman, right? And Chandrapal knows what is going to happen, right? He knows this thing is going to spit viciously and it's going to come screaming at me, right? And at that point, it's like a physical force. It's like gravity. You cannot do anything to stop it. Like, it's literally, if you freeze that frame and you look at Chandrapal as that ball is getting past his bat, it's like a bullet that's shot out of a gun, right? Nothing can stop that ball. Once it's landed in that rough, right? It's like a coil action. It's like the spring is loaded and bam. Like, there is no force in this world that can stop that ball at that point, right? So, and I think, of course, there were many examples of this, but I think that Chandrapal one is particularly, he tries to bring his bat down. The ball is already passed by that time and all of that, right? And one other thing I want to talk about is not a dismissal, but a lot of those classic ones, the Gatting one, of course, we're not talking about, but there was also a very similar to Gatting dismissal in the 99 World Cup, the famous 213 match, the first wicket, Gibbs. He just comes on, he bowls that ball, and all those balls, right? The amazing thing about all those things, and what I really loved about that mode of dismissal from Warne, not the spin, not the flight, not any of that, the dip on the ball. I mean, it's like he gives it the flight, right? It drifts, right? But the key thing is basically the dip, because the ball goes above the batsman's eye line, fine. Then it comes back down. But then when it dips down low, right? It just suddenly dips and then it does that thing. That is just impossible to play. So it was just that dip. I think that's what did Gatting in, that's what did Gibbs in, and hundreds of other batsmen, I'm sure.
It's like cryptocurrency before it's dead.
Buy the dip. Yeah,
That's right. What really enhances Warne's great dismissals is that he does it to great batsmen. And Chanders is amongst the best players of spin ever, right? He's very underrated. People don't realize it. During Harbhajan's peak, I think Harbhajan bowled about 1,000 balls, I feel, to Chandrapal and couldn't get him out. When Chanders was scoring runs of India, like, for fun, right? So to do that to Chandrapal, right, and to all the others that Shane Warne did, that's one. The other one was the Gibbs dismissal that you mentioned, right? And the drift, especially. If you guys have not read the Gideon Haig's book on Warne, I would definitely recommend you read it, because he actually talks about the drift and what makes Warne get so much of drift. He talks about the Magnus effect, and it is Gideon Haig, so he's able to go into the science of it and explain it so beautifully. It's amazing. It's remarkable. The amount of revs that Shane Warne was putting into the ball. Something that no other leg spinner at least was able to, right? And that dip makes it all happen. Even in Gatting's case, that's exactly what happened, right? Yep. You can literally see him. It's like, you're throwing a ball at a Pomeranian or something. The dogs are like,
he doesn't understand what happened. He's like, I am projecting, the trajectory of this ball. One moment it's there, one moment it's gone. Like, I don't know what happened.
We are doing VVS Lakshman over here, the most underrated, talked about person in cricket. We're saying we're not going to talk about the Gatting dismissal, and every 2 minutes we're talking about it.
It was chicory, bookery, trickery, jokery, how did he open me up? Robbery, muggery, Aussie skullduggery, what in the buggery? Who was his delivery? I might as well have been holding a cup of corn. Chicory, buggery, who is this nobody making me look so forlorn? I hate Shane
But so my thing is the Peterson dismissal in the Adelaide Test. I think that is, there's so much, but there's a particular reason why I chose that. But the setup for that match, that dismissal itself, is quite amazing, because if I remember right, England scored some 550 or something like that in the first innings. Australia did well to match up to that. And then England said, okay, we're probably going to draw this because there's only 1 day left in the game. And Warne apparently in the dressing room, right from when they scored 551, said, no, we are in the game. We're in the game. We're in the game. We're not out of the game. We're in the game. And even on the last day, when they went into the last day of Adelaide, apparently he said, no, we're in the game. We're winning this. And they said, what? We're winning this? And he said, no, we're winning this. And that's how we went into the last game. And Nasir Hussain and other people talk about this. In the match itself, the reason why I chose this is, for me, the beauty of a ball is how quickly a batsman disappears from the crease in sheer embarrassment at being bowled or caught or something like that. Kevin Peterson ran from that place.
He literally
He
staggers
just
away.
couldn't. Yeah, he couldn't stand. He couldn't stand to be there with the camera on him. He runs because he was so embarrassed by how he got out. And that, to me, therefore, is probably the number one that I pick.
I think it's worth pointing out that when COVID began and sports federations and sports bodies didn't know what to do to fill the gap in live sport, this was one of the first full days of Test cricket that Cricket Australia streamed on their YouTube. And this day is entirely down to Shane Warne's will. England were leading by 96, 8 wickets in hand. Warne turns it around and Australia win that game. I think the series is still alive. Australia 1-0 or 2-0 up at that stage. It's still alive. So that's completely down to Warne. And you should totally watch it if you're a Test cricket fan.
And in fact, that's where the series turns, because England have won the previous Ashes. Everyone is expecting England to come back and put up a strong fight in Australia for the first time in many years. Australia won the first test. This was actually the second test, right? And I think Collingwood scored a double hundred in the first innings. England were playing really well. Everyone thought, okay, this is the new England. They've come back. They know how to compete with Australia now. On that one day, Warne came and altered the destiny of that series, because the next 3 tests were complete washouts.
But that's coming back to what you said, Nitin, before. I mean, he gets good batsmen out. In that same match, Kevin Peterson in the first innings, Collingwood, I think, scored a double hundred. Peterson
I think
also
KP
scores
scored
a
a lot
century,
as well. Yeah,
150 or something like that, if I remember right.
Yes.
And he was in peak form, and he ran away when he got bowled. Tony, you were saying something.
Oh, no. I was saying, as a counterpoint, I would have loved to have seen Shane Warne dismissing Virat Kohli, and Kohli just standing there and looking in sheer amazement, and probably goes to Warne to get notes as to how that happened before he leaves the crease. Right?
The memes.
Just saying that there are spinners far inferior to Shane Warne who are doing that to Virat Kohli right
exactly.
now.
Yeah.
Probably beneath Warne standards right
That's
now,
what I'm
Virat
saying.
Kohli.
So if his reaction to Moeen Ali dismissing him is like that, I want to see how he reacts to Warne's dismissal.
And Embuldinia yesterday.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
was the
I think at this point it's totally worth asking, right? Like it's unfair to define Warne by his statistics, as Bryden Coverdale wrote yesterday. It's like measuring Shakespeare by the number of plays he wrote. But very
Number of
interesting.
words he wrote, I think.
Number of words he wrote. So I think worth asking this question. It's very interesting. So Warne has 708 wickets, leading leg spinner of all time. This Kumble, whom we can debate what kind of bowler he was. But as you go down the list, can anyone guess which leg spinner has the next most test wickets after these two? So it's Warne, Kumble, way down the list.
Wow.
Not Chandana.
No.
McGill.
No, I
I
think
think it's a good guess.
No, yeah, it's
Mushtaq Ahmed.
Oh, Mushi. Oh, right.
nationality correct.
Kadir.
Kadir, Abdul Kadir.
Okay.
It's Danish Kanaria with 261
Oh,
wickets.
right. Oh my God. Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, right.
Kane,
Sorry,
yeah.
where is what? How many is Danish at?
261.
261, man. Yeah.
I thought it would be a Chinaman bowler, but it is a Danish guy.
No, but I think actually that's a great point that Srinath brought up, right? Because one of the things that I think about leg spin itself, right? Like I think, yes, Abdul Qadir obviously predated Warne, right? He was there before that, but Warne was sort of like a bridge, a spiritual bridge to like an earlier era, whether it was in terms of the quote unquote attitude era of cricket, right? And Warne sort of brought some of that in from the teams of the 70s, or even leg spin, right? And I think that those are the kinds of things, like these are sort of sport changing things, right? They change the sport. Like those are the things that are going to remain forever. Like apart from just the statistics and just the sheer, whatever you did, your name is always going to be associated with that. So I think that's also one thing that, how many kids picked up a ball and sort of whirled it the way Warne did and all of that just because of that guy, right? So talking about
Probably a good time to mention, we're talking about the art of spin and the revival of leg spin and so on. One of the people that helped in this process was Terry Jenner, who was Warne's coach at some level. Strange career himself. I mean, he played a little bit and he played at the highest levels, and then he got caught up in all sorts of things, and spent some time in jail as well. And then when he was released, he was suggested by Chappell, if I remember right, to be a coach of spinners. Ian Chappell, to be a coach of spinners, and that's where Shane Warne actually interacted with him, and absolutely fell in love with him, and learned much of his craft from Jenner. And he actually turned to Jenner even at low points in his career, not just for advice on the art of spin bowling, but also the mental aspect of working.
Yeah,
in these
but I think
spaces.
we all had, at least we were, sort of in school when Shane Warne was bowling, and we all had at least like 10 people in our class who would try and bowl like Shane Warne, right? Just using a rubber ball, but still the action was sort of always going on.
Actually, speaking of things that would have done Warne proud, so while we're recording this, I'm keeping one eye on the test match. So Jadeja now has a 4-wicket haul. There's one more wicket to fall for Sri Lanka. And of course, the 175 not out yesterday. And I'm sure, Warne would be really proud of this if he could see this.
Absolutely.
Speaking of the batting part, right? There's this lovely clip I saw from Andrew Strauss yesterday where he was talking about when Shane Warne was batting, right, and Ashley Giles is bowling to him like rubbish outside the leg stump, and Warne is just like calmly blocking it, and Andrew Strauss from Silly Point goes when he's really struggling here to Giles, keep bowling that, and Warne looks at him and he says, "Are you kidding me, mate? Like, the only person who's struggling here is Ashley Giles." And
It's you.
Actually, what
Is Andrew
is
Strauss.
you? Because he was having the hex over Andrew Strauss. So he like,
Right, at that point,
you're shit, mate.
yeah, and he was like,
And then
if you keep this up, I'll hit the next ball for a 6. And Strauss again goes, "Giles, you were having him in trouble here." And right on cue, Warne slog sweeps him for a 6, right? So wrong person to bring mind games to whether he's
And
bowling.
we have to talk about mind games and sledges and so on. My favorite is how he sledged Ganguly out in Adelaide. We've talked about this. He was blocking at one end, and Warne tells him, "Look, they haven't come to see you block. Sachin Tendulkar is at the other end. Crowds come to see him. Get out of the way." And then a few balls later, Ganguly tries to hit him for a 6 and he gets caught.
He gets stumped actually. He gets stumped. He wanders down the track. A very rare Shane Warne googly, which Ganguly in his unique style completely fumbles. Yeah.
And apparently, so Shane Warne and Daryl Cullinan famously. Cullinan, I think, got dropped and he came back to Australia for a series. And Shane Warne's at slip basically telling him, "Don't you dare get out to Glenn McGrath. I'm going to knock you over when I come." And he keeps going. "I've been waiting 4 years for this." And Cullinan apparently turns to Shane Warne and says, "Looks like you've spent the last 4 years eating." So... So yeah, got it back.
So he features in quite a few of the best sledges and so on.
I think one famous sledge. I think he and Arjuna Ranatunga had many run-ins, right?
Run-ins or walk-ins?
Run-ins.
Okay. So this famous thing that Shane Warne said once in Australia were playing Sri Lanka after a while, he looked at Ranatunga and said, "What did you just swallow a cow or something?" Apparently. But I think Arjuna got the better of that.
And coming from Warne, that's saying something, right? Like yesterday's tributes at the MCG were pies, cigarettes, and beers, and if he's selling that to Ranatunga, that's quite something.
And talking of the MCG, completely unprecedented. The Great Southern Stand, which people, I would never have thought that could be changed to anything else. It's like the B stand in Bombay, was it? In Tony, what's the
North Stand? I don't know.
North Stand. The Great Southern Stand was renamed. The Victorian Premier said that it will be renamed to the Shane Warne Stand. It's quite a big thing. It's indeed quite a big thing at the MCG.
But it's also very fitting, right? I mean, it's absolutely if there was a person, right, that you would
Australian,
of course, but Victorian that you would Yeah. So
We must talk about his batting as well. We've been talking about his bowling quite a bit, but he's batted incredibly well in some really tough situations, and done. Of course, he never got that 100, which he ought to have probably got in
Against New
in
Zealand,
Perth
yeah.
against New Zealand. And there's
Yeah.
a video circulating that the ball that actually got him out was actually a no ball. But be that as it may, I mean, he never got that century, but he really pulled Australia in many times out of the hole.
That 2005 Ashes,
No,
I think he had around 290 something runs. He was one of the
Including
better.
in that Adelaide match, if I remember right, he got a 50 in that Adelaide match.
No, I'm talking about the previous one, the one they lost in England. He
Yeah.
had 40
Oh,
wickets
200.
and yeah.
05.
249 runs.
He's
249.
almost
No, but
as
just-
good as Ashwin. Just about that.
Without YouTube.
No, but
yeah.
I think is that
Speaking-
the highest number of wickets ever taken in a 5-test series? It's definitely number 1 or number 2, I believe.
40, right? He had
40
that
wickets.
year.
Imagine you've
Yeah.
taken 8 wickets a test for 5 tests. Yeah.
Per test, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, no, but speaking about going back to the batting, right, and like the one that got away, right? He never got that century. He never got to triple figures. I think, if anything, I mean, I am 100% sure Warne would disagree, right? Being the competitor that he was, but I think, as Led Zeppelin famously said, right, into every life a little rain must fall. I think into every cricketer's story, a little romance must fall, right? And most usually these romances, at least for us, the fans, are the things that they couldn't do, right? Or the things that they couldn't get to. Martin Crowe famously 299, getting out at 299 to basically a dibbly-dobbly from Arjuna Ranatunga, right? And getting caught behind. But I think, if anything, it lends sort of that aura of romance. Like, this was a guy who was no mug with the bat, as we were talking about, right? He could come out, he could hang with the tail, he could hang with the wicket keepers, he could blast things out of the ground when he wanted to. But I think the fact that, not just the fact that he didn't get to the triple figures, but that it's so obviously and openly ate at him. Like, he talked so much about it, right? He talked all the time about, this is the one thing that I really want, and this is the thing that, I haven't got.
That's the bald spot cart. It ended up with Mark Richardson sledging Shane Warne. Like,
Right,
that's also a thing.
Right. And the moment when, actually, this is not something recent, right? But the moment where this really sort of was driven home for me was when Kumble got that 100, right? In England, famously,
Indeed.
right? And that's when I remember thinking that, maybe in every other aspect, whether any other statistical aspect, you look at number of wickets, number of games won, all of that, this guy's got the better of Kumble, right? But in this one thing, and you just know that this one thing matters so much to him, Kumble will always have that upper hand, right? And he can always go and say, hey, I got that 100, even if there was no bat on that ball that slipped in under and went for 4 byes, right? He did get that 100. But I
why
think,
are we
again, like I
comparing
said,
a leg spinner with a fast bowler?
but I do just think that, it lends a little bit of that air of romance, which,
Agree.
again,
The other thing is, Kumble was never part of a hat trick. Warne was. Warne was the third wicket in Harbhajan's.
But one was a
right,
part
right.
of the. But one was a part of hat trick from the other end as well, and Kumble
Not
wasn't.
you,
So there you
not
go.
Harbhajan's. You mean SK Bansal's hat trick? But
Okay, so I have another question. So Shane Warne never played ODI cricket for Australia after being sort of banned for a year, right, after the diuretic ban. However, he did play again. He played ODI cricket again. What am I referring to here?
It wasn't an MCC versus rest of the world game, was it?
It was-
At Lords, right?
Nah, not that one. He played the Australia versus World 11 series.
Oh,
the Super
at the
Series that
MCG.
happened. He
At the
played
MCG.
that at the MCG, that's right. And so the last 2 wickets he took against the World 11 were, I believe, Mohammad Yusuf and Virender Sehwag was
And
his last
Sehwag, yeah.
one-day wicket. So those were the only. So he just played, I think, those 2 games after that. He never played for Australia after being banned, but he played for Australia 11 against World 11. And of course, the Test career carried on for some more time.
Slightly off topic, but how many wickets does Muthaiya Muralidharan have for Sri Lanka in tests?
yeah, this is
799,
the
792.
98,
795.
no, yeah.
795,
Five,
and the
right.
5 wickets that also counts
Was
as when
for
he
the-
played as part of some exhibition 11. But
Yes.
yeah, so
That
800,
obviously counts.
but -5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's quickly talk about other stuff happening and then wrap up this thing. Any observations on the Women's Cricket World Cup at all?
Why is Mithali Raj still playing? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've
I've seen painful 36 for 9s, but today's 9 of 36 balls from Mithali Raj.
And I was saying that we've also seen other painful 36s in World Cups before, but it's yeah. No, actually, yeah. As we speak, right? I guess India Pakistan is going on, and I think the Indian team did really well to recover to 244. At one point, it looked like 100 odd for 5 or something. It looked like they would fold very cheaply, but yeah, I think let's see where that goes. Yeah, yesterday there was Australia versus England, which was a really thriller of game.
Yeah, but also
I watched,
in that match,
sorry, go on.
was a beautiful leg spinner and stumping, right? So King
Yes.
bowled, stumped Healy, and then basically there was another sort of video that was added on after that, which was again stumped Healy, bowled King, which is Shane Warne. So beautifully symmetric sort of
nice.
thing that
Yeah,
happened.
that's nice. Yeah.
Nice. I watched a fair bit of the Australia-Pakistan game. I'm really interested in seeing Pakistan cricket come back to some sort of shape and form.
Yeah, I don't see a result
No.
coming out of that test match. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's going to be one of those rare boring draws, which we're not having too many of those these
Yeah,
days.
Pakistan is coming back into into Test cricket at home, so they're probably preparing pitches from when pitches were prepared.
They
for these
prepared a
kinds of
highway for the
matches.
procession.
Yeah, there you go. And of course, India is playing at the moment against Sri Lanka, and it looks like they'll wrap it up. I was really disappointed with the follow-on as well, because I would have thought that they would have given Kohli another chance to get some runs in his 100th test. But
Wait,
it's okay.
another one from the Russell Arnold fact factory is that this is probably the closest that 2 international tests have been played in terms of geographic proximity, right? So India is playing in Mohali and
Right. Yeah, we had. Yeah, I said that.
Oh,
Yeah,
how far
Rawalpindi
away
and-
are they from each other?
Not very, right? Because Chandigarh and Rawalpindi
Just
are
across
not.
the border,
Yeah, they're not very far. Yeah, it's yeah.
So since they are on the Indo-Pak border, you could say this is the Wagaris of Test cricket.
oh, I thought
Bad one.
it's the border
Series of Test cricket.
Gavaskar.
So
So one thing I do want to say is this might be the first episode of Bits and Pieces where, and of course I'm going to shatter the streak by mentioning this, where we did not speak about the IPL. No, KL Rahul, we didn't speak about the IPL.
Okay.
The other big, who's hosting today, right? I have to bring this up. So this is, and Mohan, feel free to cut this out, but I don't know if people wanted to react very briefly to the continuing saga that is Waipu game.
Oh, yeah.
And that's my
Absolutely,
very
please.
oblique
Oh, my God.
IPL reference.
no, go for it.
I don't know, thoughts, guys? Nitin?
No, I mean, I think we will be doing yeoman service to a lot of people because no one wants to watch Boria Majumdar speak for 9 minutes.
Yes, we should TLDR. Yeah.
So quick summary is that apparently in the screenshot that Saha shared, there's one thing that's clearly been blurred out, which is the date. And so Boria's point is that
And he's added a spurious missed call.
no,
phantom
that's
missed
not
call.
true because
No,
if
is
you
it?
if you
Okay.
receive a missed call, it'll show up, but for the caller it won't.
Oh, I
right?
see.
So Boria claimed that the missed call was inserted, but the fact remains that Saha has it. So
We can't verify that.
yeah. Basically Saha has blurred out the date, and it looks like a continuous stream. We assumed it was over 2 days, but apparently it was over 3 or 4 days, and a week before Saha was excluded from the test squad. And Boria is going to apparently file a defamation suit, and you can follow his Twitter to see that tweet where he's actually filed a defamation suit against Saha. So,
Apropos of screenshot shared on digital media, inter alia injunction.
To be honest, the filed lawsuit is going to be more interesting to read than anything Boria ever wrote. But that's a different matter.
interestingly, BCCI have said that Saha is in breach of contract.
For-
his playing contract.
but that's for referring to Ganguly and
Correct.
etc. Right? Not,
Yeah,
not
and
necessarily.
that's the one point that they could find to attack his credibility, and they actually took the step to do that, which is quite amazing.
Indian cricket.
But isn't like Ganguly's tenure over? Like officially, it's elapsed, right?
It's never over.
Till it's over.
The one thing in Indian cricket is that nothing
Until
is
the
ever
Fat
over.
Lady 6. That's right.
Yeah, the ghost of Srinivasan is still sort of wandering around the corridors of BCCI. So nothing is ever over, and that's one of the things that interim committee tried to put in place, that there are fixed terms for office bearers and so on. But these guys, come in there and they occupy the kursi forever.
The interim committee was the only committee that was actually interim. all the other committees are pretty much permanent.
There you go. On that note, perhaps we should draw curtains on this particular episode. So, brief concluding remarks, and then we'll draw close to this episode, guys. So, Tony.
Oh, I think we've spoken enough. I think we'll just call this episode "Shane on You Crazy Diamond," and hopefully.
Wow,
That's nice. Yeah.
Amazing.
That's indeed quite amazing. There's nothing more to say after that, Tony. Thanks a lot for this episode. Hope you enjoy it. Like the episode, share it, subscribe to Bits and Pieces, and we'll see you next week with another episode of Bits and Pieces. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What are your first memories of Shane?
The first thing I heard about Shane was, in the same test match, 91-92 in Sydney. I said that they have picked a new leg spinner, Shane Warne, and he's turned up in a Porsche, right? He used to drive Porsche, convertible Porsche.
One of those things, yeah.
Those days, and he said, okay, let's see what he can do, and this guy is going to do something special.